The atmosphere in the grand spire of the Valerion Hegemony didn't just feel heavy. It felt like it was trying to crush the very soul out of Commander Elias Thorne. This wasn't a room built for comfort. It was a cathedral of intimidation, a dizzying expanse of obsidian glass and floating silver geometry that defied every law of human physics. For 3 standard days, Elias had been drilled by diplomatic droids until his brain felt like frayed copper wire. Bow at 30 degrees. Do not look the High Matriarch in her primary eyes. Never, under any circumstances, show your teeth. To a Valerian, a smile was a declaration of war. But Elias wasn't here to start a war. He was here because he had just ended one. The silence in the hall was absolute, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the gravity stabilizers. Thousands of high-ranking Valerian officials lined the translucent balconies above, their crystalline skin shimmering with a pale, judgmental light. They looked down at the lone human in his battered flight suit, a sharp contrast to the flowing ethereal silks of the imperial court. To them he was a primitive, a biological curiosity from a backwater planet called Earth. Yet this primitive was the reason their empire still existed. At the far end of the hall sat the Empress Zilara. She didn't sit on a throne so much as she floated within a nebula of containment fields. She was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, shimmering, multifaceted skin, eyes like dying stars, and a presence that radiated cold, absolute authority. Hold on. Before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. Elias took a breath, the recycled air tasting of ozone and ancient dust. He reached the center of the hall, the circle of recompense. This was the moment the entire galaxy had been waiting for. According to the ancient compact, the savior of the hegemony was entitled to the bounty of stars. Zilara's voice didn't travel through the air. It vibrated directly inside Elias's skull, melodic and terrifyingly powerful. "Commander Elias Thorne of the United Sol Alliance," she announced, her gaze fixed forward, never deigning to meet his eyes. "You stood where our own legions faltered. You broke the siege of Krios with nothing but a damaged freighter and a core of Terran stubbornness. The hegemony does not leave its debts unpaid." A shimmering holographic veil ignited in the center of the room. Images began to flicker, hundreds of women from a dozen different vassal species, and even elite Valerian nobles. They were scientists, artists, and warriors, each one chosen for their genetic perfection and status. "You are a hero of a lesser cycle, yet you have earned a place among the gods," Zilara continued, a hint of boredom creeping into her celestial tone. "As promised by the blood treaty, you may choose any woman from our dominion to be your bondmate. They shall be your prize, your legacy, and the bridge between our worlds. Speak your choice, human, and let this ceremony conclude." The court leaned forward. The nobles whispered, betting on which high-born lady the ape would choose to elevate his lowly status. Elias didn't look at the hologram. He didn't look at the princesses or the warriors. He took one step forward, breaking protocol. The guard's energy pikes hummed to life with a deadly hiss. Elias looked directly into the Empress's primary eyes, a move of such sheer defiance that a gasp rippled through the galleries like a physical wave. "I've made my choice," Elias said, his voice rasping but steady. Zilara finally looked at him, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "Then point to your prize, Terran. Which of these blossoms will you take back to your mudball of a planet?" Elias raised a scarred hand, his finger pointing straight at the nebula of the throne. "I don't want them," he said. "I want you." The silence that followed was louder than any explosion Elias had ever heard. The silence wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It felt as if the very molecules of oxygen in the grand spire had frozen solid. On the observation galleries, the shimmering skin of the Valerian nobles turned a frantic, jagged violet, the color of pure, unadulterated shock. In their 10,000-year history, no species had ever dared to speak to a matriarch this way, let alone a human whose planet had only recently discovered how to fold space. Empress Zilara didn't move. For a long, agonizing heartbeat, She looked like a statue carved from starlight. Then the containment fields around her throne pulsed with a violent crimson flare. The gravity in the room shifted, making Elias's knees buckle, but he refused to drop his gaze. He kept his finger leveled at the most powerful being in the known sectors. "You want me?" Xylara's voice was no longer a melodic vibration. It was a low, dangerous rumble that shook the floorboards. "You are a creature of carbon and bone, Terran. Your lifespan is a flicker. Your mind is a candle in a hurricane compared to the collective consciousness of the hegemony. Do you even comprehend the blasphemy you have just uttered?" Elias didn't flinch. He had stared down a Devourer-class dreadnought with a leaking fuel tank. A literal goddess in a silk dress wasn't going to make him blink. "The blood treaty says I can choose any woman of the Dominion," Elias said, his voice echoing off the obsidian walls. "Is the Empress not a woman of her own empire? Or are your laws just bedtime stories you tell the lesser races to keep us in line?" A collective gasp hissed through the hall. The Imperial Guard, towering constructs of bioarmor and light, stepped forward, their polearms glowing with disintegrator charges. One word from Xylara and Elias would be reduced to a pile of gray ash before he could take his next breath. Xylara raised a slender, translucent hand, halting her guards. Her eyes, usually as cold as deep space, were now burning with a spark of something Elias hadn't seen before. Genuine, piercing curiosity. She drifted down from her floating dais, her feet hovering inches above the ground, until she was standing directly in front of him. Up close, she was overwhelming. She smelled like ozone and winter jasmine, and the sheer psychic pressure radiating from her felt like a physical weight on his chest. She was a head taller than him, looking down with a mixture of disdain and fascination. "You would reject the daughters of solar kings? You would turn away the most beautiful genetic templates of 100 worlds? For a crown you can never wear, and a woman who could unmake your DNA with a thought?" She whispered, her voice now audible only to him. "I don't want a crown," Elias replied, his voice dropping to a low, gritty tone. "And I don't want a template. I want the only person in this room who actually understands what it's like to carry the weight of an entire species on their shoulders. I want the only one here who isn't afraid of me." Xylara laughed. It was a sharp, crystalline sound that felt like glass breaking. "Fear you? You are a primate playing with fire, Commander Thorne." "Then let's see who gets burned," Elias countered. The Empress turned back to her court, her silken robe swirling like a dying nebula. The nobles waited for the execution order. They expected her to blast this arrogant human into the void. Instead, she did something that threw the entire Valerian social order into absolute chaos. She reached out and touched the collar of Elias's battered flight suit, her fingers cold as ice but humming with power. "The treaty is absolute," she announced to the stunned assembly. "But a bondmate is not a slave. If the Terran chooses the throne, he must endure the trial of the Sun Core. If he survives, I shall grant him his request. If he fails, his species will pay the price for his arrogance in blood." Elias felt a cold pit form in his stomach. He knew about the trial. No non-Valerian had ever survived it. It wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of the soul. "Do you still want me, human?" Xylara asked, a predatory smile finally touching her lips. "Or would you like to pick a nice, safe princess from the hologram?" Elias tightened his jaw. "Prepare the chamber." But as Xylara turned away, she leaned into his ear, her voice a chilling promise. "You have no idea what you've just signed up for, Elias Thorne. By morning you'll be begging for the void." The trial of the Sun Core wasn't a physical arena. It was a psychological furnace. Elias was led into a chamber where the walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a rhythmic, golden light that hummed at a frequency that made his teeth ache. In the center of the room stood a pillar of pure, swirling energy, the condensed essence of a collapsed star. "You have 1 hour, Terran." The High Arbiter's voice boomed through the intercom, sounding more like a funeral rite than a set of instructions. "Touch the core. If your spirit is discordant, the radiation will unravel your nervous system in seconds. If you are true, you shall see the Empress as she really is." Elias looked at the swirling gold. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wasn't a mystic or a psychic. He was a pilot who had spent his life fixing hydraulic leaks and dodging plasma fire. But he remembered the way Zylara had looked at him, not as a hero, but as a curiosity. He wanted to shatter that gaze. He stepped forward. The heat was instantaneous. It wasn't the kind of heat that burned skin. It was the kind that burned memories. As his fingers brushed the surface of the core, the room vanished. Suddenly, Elias wasn't in the spire anymore. He was standing in a void, and before him stood Zylara. But she wasn't the glowing, untouchable Empress. She looked fragile. Her skin was gray, her eyes hollowed out by centuries of ruling a dying species that had traded its soul for cold, logical perfection. "Why are you here, human?" Her voice echoed, stripped of its regal resonance. "You could have had any of them. They would have loved you. They would have given you a life of peace. Why choose the one heart in this galaxy that is made of stone?" "Because stone can be carved," Elias gritted out, his body in the physical world beginning to convulse as the energy surged through him. "And because you're lying to yourself. You're bored, Zylara. You've spent 1,000 years surrounded by perfection, and you're starving for something real. Something messy. Something human." The vision of the Empress recoiled, her face contorting in a mix of rage and genuine fear. In the real world, the observers gasped. Elias's flight suit began to smolder. His veins were glowing blue beneath his skin. The Valerion doctors moved to terminate the trial, fearing a biological meltdown that would contaminate the chamber. But Zylara, watching from the high observation deck, raised her hand. "Let him stay," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the man who was currently defying the laws of her ancestors. Inside the vision, the void began to crack. Elias felt his mind fracturing. He saw the history of the Valerion, the wars, the cold logic, the abandonment of emotion to survive the vacuum of space. He felt their loneliness, and he offered his own. The loneliness of a pilot in the dark, the warmth of a Terran sun, the stubborn refusal to give up even when the engines are dead. "I don't want your throne," Elias roared into the psychic storm. "I want the woman hiding behind it." The sun core flared with a blinding white intensity that knocked every observer in the room to the floor. The gravity stabilizers failed. For 3 seconds, everyone in the spire felt the weightlessness of the void. Then, silence. When the light faded, Elias was on his knees, gasping for air, his hands charred but whole. The core was dark, its energy spent. He looked up, his vision blurry, to see Zylara standing at the edge of the observation deck, her regal mask cracked. For the first time in recorded history, the Empress of the Valerion Hegemony was trembling. She didn't call the guards. She didn't dismiss the court. She descended the stairs slowly, her silk robes dragging on the scorched floor. She stopped inches from Elias and reached out, touching the burn marks on his hands. "No one survives the core," she whispered loud enough for the silent court to hear. "It filters out the unworthy. It burns away the liars." She looked into his eyes, and this time, she didn't look down. She looked across. "You didn't just survive, Elias Thorne. You broke it." The court erupted in a low, panicked murmur. The High Arbiter stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Your Majesty, the protocol, the human has passed, but surely the bonding cannot proceed. It is a biological impossibility. He is the man who just conquered the heart of our empire," Zylara interrupted, her voice regaining its iron edge. "And he has made his choice. Now I shall make mine." She turned to Elias, a spark of true, dangerous fire in her eyes. "You wanted me, Terran? You have me. But being the consort of an empress isn't a reward. It's a sentence. Are you ready to face the galaxy with a target on your back?" Elias wiped a streak of soot from his forehead and grinned, a real toothy human grin that sent a shiver of primal fear through the Valerian nobles. "I've been a target my whole life, Zylara. At least now I've got the best view in the house." But as the court began to clear, a dark shadow loomed on the long-range scanners of the spire. A message was coming through from the fringe. The very enemies Elias had defeated were not gone, and they were not happy about this new alliance. The celebration lasted exactly 3 minutes before the sky over the Valerion capital turned a bruised, sickly violet. High above the obsidian spires, the planetary shield grid began to flicker, screaming under the pressure of a massive orbital bombardment. The silent court was silent no longer. Panic, a sensation the Valerian had suppressed for eons, spread through the galleries like a virus. "The Creosian remnant," Zylara hissed, her eyes snapping toward the holographic tactical displays that shimmered into existence around her. "They didn't retreat. They were waiting for us to lower our guard for this ceremony." Elias was already on his feet, the exhaustion from the Sun Core trial vanishing behind a surge of adrenaline. He looked at the readouts. 8 heavy destroyers were dropping out of warp in the upper atmosphere. They weren't looking to occupy the planet. They were aiming for the Grand Spire. They wanted to decapitate the hegemony in one stroke while the Empress was distracted by her human toy. "Your fleet?" Elias barked, grabbing a discarded comlink from the floor. "Scattered to the fringe sectors to maintain the peace treaty," Zylara replied, her voice cold, but her hands moving with lightning speed across the light controls. "We have the orbital platforms, but they lack a central tactical processor. Without a prime commander, they'll fire blindly." Elias looked at the Empress. She was a political genius, a psychic powerhouse, but she wasn't a dogfighter. She didn't know how to dance in the debris of a collapsing star. He did. "I can link them," Elias said, "but your systems won't accept a human neural signature. I need a bridge." Zylara looked at him, the weight of her entire civilization resting on her shoulders. To bridge a human mind to a Valerian defense grid was more than taboo. It was a biological fusion that could leave both of them brain dead. The court officials screamed in protest, calling it a desecration of the imperial bloodline. "He is a barbarian," the High Arbiter shrieked. "You cannot let him into the hive mind." Zylara ignored the official. She stepped toward Elias, her multifaceted skin glowing with a fierce, defiant light. "You said you wanted me, Elias Thorne. You wanted the woman, not the throne. Well, this is what it means to be with me. We are the shield of this empire." She grabbed his hands, her fingers interlocking with his. "I will be your bridge. My mind will translate your instincts into their code. But be warned, if your heart falters for a single millisecond, the feedback will incinerate us both." "I've survived your Sun Core," Elias grinned, though his heart was hammering. "A few Creosian ships? That's just a Tuesday for a Terran." As the first shockwave hit the spire, sentries falling and glass shattering, Zylara closed her eyes and pulled Elias into a psychic embrace. The world vanished. Suddenly, Elias wasn't standing on a floor. He was floating in a sea of data. He could feel the heartbeat of every defense turret, the heat of every plasma battery, and most intensely, he could feel Zylara's thoughts. She was cold, yes, but beneath that was a roaring fire of determination. And for the first time, she felt him, the messy, chaotic, indomitable spirit of humanity. "Targeting solutions acquired." Elias's voice echoed through the psychic link. "Hold on, Empress. We're about to show them why you don't mess with a man on his wedding day." In the skies above, the automated platforms didn't just fire. They moved with a predatory grace that defied Valerian logic. They swirled, dived, and struck with the erratic, unpredictable brilliance of a human fighter pilot. The Creosian destroyers, expecting a rigid, calculated defense, began to pop like bubbles in the dark. But as the final destroyer began its suicide run toward the spire, Elias felt a dark, jagged presence clawing at the edge of their shared mind. Something was wrong. The Creosians hadn't come alone. Elias. Zylara's voice groaned in his head, filled with sudden pain. "There is a virus, a psychic shackle. They're targeting me through the link." Elias felt the connection fracturing. If the link broke now, the defense grid would shut down, and the final destroyer would level the city. The psychic shackle felt like molten lead being poured into Elias's ears. It wasn't a weapon of metal. It was a weapon of pure distilled agony designed to paralyze a Valerian mind. Xylara's grip on his hands tightened until her claws drew blood, her radiant skin flickering like a dying bulb. The Creosians had known they couldn't outgun her, so they'd brought a mind killer, an ancient forbidden frequency designed to shatter an empress. Elias, break the link, Xylara gasped, her eyes rolling back. It's consuming everything. In the tactical overlay of his mind, Elias saw the final Creosian destroyer. It was a jagged, blackened spear of a ship, trailing fire, but its engines were locked at maximum thrust. It was 3 minutes away from impacting the spire. If the defense grid stayed down, millions would die in the firestorm. "I'm not breaking anything," Elias roared, the sound echoing both in the room and in the psychic void. He didn't pull away. Instead, he did something no Valerian would ever dream of. He leaned in. He threw his own chaotic, messy human subconscious into the path of the virus. A Valerian mind was a beautiful, structured crystal, easy to shatter with the right frequency. But a human mind? A human mind was a junkyard of contradictions, trauma, adrenaline, and sheer, stubborn spite. Elias flooded the link with every raw emotion he had. He gave the virus the memory of his first crash landing. He gave it the grief of losing his wingman. He gave it the stubborn, irrational heat of his desire for Xylara. The mind-killer virus hit the wall of Elias's humanity and hesitated. It couldn't calculate the logic of a species that climbed mountains just to see the view, or stayed in a burning cockpit to save a stranger. "Xylara, look at me," Elias shouted. Through the haze of pain, the Empress saw him not as a hero but as a storm. She felt his heartbeat, rhythmic and relentless, acting as a metronome for her own failing pulse. She anchored herself to him. She stopped trying to be a goddess and started being a survivor. Together, they surged back into the defense grid. In the sky above, the orbital platforms didn't just fire, they sang. A coordinated, devastating volley of pure ion energy caught the Creosian destroyer mid-air. The ship didn't just explode, it was vaporized into a cloud of glowing dust that drifted harmlessly over the capital like artificial snow. The psychic pressure snapped. Elias and Xylara collapsed onto the scorched floor of the Circle of Recompense, gasping for air, their hands still locked together. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the silence of shock or judgment. It was the silence of awe. The High Arbiter and the nobles looked down from the galleries, watching their untouchable Empress trembling on the floor, cradled by a human in a burnt flight suit. "The threat is neutralized," Xylara whispered, her voice shaky but returning to its regal depth. She pulled back slightly, looking at Elias. Her eyes were no longer like dying stars, they were warm. For the first time she looked alive. "You felt it, didn't you?" The void echo. "You should have died, Elias. No biological mind can process that much static." "Guess I've got a thick skull," Elias grunted, trying to stand and failing. Xylara caught him. She stood up, pulling him with her, and turned to face the thousands of Valerian watching them. She didn't let go of his hand. "Today," she announced, her voice booming through the spire's speakers to every corner of the planet, "the hegemony was saved. Not by our logic, not by our ancient blood, but by the one thing we forgot existed." She looked at Elias, and then back at her people. Humanity. But the High Arbiter wasn't finished. He descended the stairs, his face a mask of traditionalist rage. "A victory, yes, but the blood treaty is still a legal contract, matriarch. To bond with a human is to invite chaos into our genetics. The council will move to impeach. You have chosen a consort, but you have lost your throne." Xylara leveled a cold stare at the official. "Then let them try to take it from us." Elias felt the tension rising again, but then he noticed something on the long-range scanners. A new set of warp signatures. These weren't Creosian. They were blocky, ugly, and built like tanks. Xylara?" Elias pointed at the screen. "Those are Terran signatures. The United Sol Alliance fleet just arrived. The room went cold. The humans hadn't come to rescue Elias. They had come to claim their prize. The Grand Spire's tactical displays turned a violent, urgent amber. Floating on the edge of the atmosphere were 12 Terran dreadnoughts, massive, blocky slabs of tungsten and nuclear fire that looked like floating industrial cities. They weren't elegant like the Valerion ships. They were built for one thing: winning a fight at any cost. "Commander Thorne," a voice crackled through the Spire's communication array. It was Admiral Vance, the Iron Dog of the United Sol Alliance. "We tracked the Creosian signatures. We're here to extract you and secure the tribute the Hegemony owes us. Step away from the alien, Elias. We're bringing you home with your prize." The Valerian nobles hissed, their skin turning a defensive, jagged red. The High Arbiter pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "You see? The barbarians have come to pillage us. This was your plan all along, wasn't it, human? You choose the Empress to weaken us, and then your fleet moves in for the kill." Elias looked at the screen, then at Zylara. Her eyes were hard again, the warmth of their psychic link retreating behind a wall of imperial duty. She let go of his hand, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second before dropping. "Is this true, Elias?" she asked, her voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Am I just a strategic asset to your alliance?" "Vance, stand down!" Elias roared into the comlink, ignoring the Empress's question for a moment. "The situation is under control. The Creosians are gone. We are in the middle of a diplomatic bonding ceremony." "Bonding?" Vance's laugh was like gravel in a blender. "Elias, you're a war hero, not a diplomat. The High Command doesn't want a bond. They want the Valerian tech specs and a foothold in this sector. Now bring the Empress to the extraction point, or we'll start softening up the Spire." The betrayal stung worse than the Sun Core. Elias realized that to his own people he wasn't a hero. He was a Trojan horse. They didn't care about the woman he had just bled for. They saw a resource to be harvested. Zylara stepped back onto her floating dais, her containment fields reigniting with a cold blue light. "So," she whispered, her voice echoing with a bitter finality, "the messy, emotional human is just as cold as a Valerian after all. You didn't want me. You wanted my empire." "Zylara, listen to me," Elias started, but the Imperial Guard lowered their pikes. "Silence, Terran," she commanded. She turned to her High Arbiter. "Activate the resonance cannon. If the humans want a war, we shall give them one that will burn their system to a cinder." "Wait," Elias shouted, jumping between the Empress and the tactical consoles. "You both want to act like machines? Fine. But you're forgetting one thing. I'm the one who linked the grid. I still have the override codes in my head." He looked at the screen where Admiral Vance waited and then up at Zylara. He was one man standing between two civilizations that were seconds away from a galaxy-ending mistake. "Vance, if you fire one shot, I'll personally scuttle every ship in your fleet using the Valerian feedback loop." And Zylara, "If you fire that cannon, you're proving that everything I saw in your heart during the trial was a lie." He stood there, a lone human in a room of gods and monsters, holding nothing but his own conviction. "I made my choice," Elias said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I chose the woman, not the Empire, and not the Alliance. Now, are you going to kill me for it, or are you going to start acting like people?" The countdown on the Terran dreadnoughts hit 10 seconds. The resonance cannon hummed with enough power to crack a moon. The silence was absolute. On the digital display, the countdown for the Terran dreadnoughts held at 001. High above, the resonance cannon's glow dimmed from a blinding white to a soft rhythmic pulse. Elias stood in the center of the hall, his chest heaving, his hands balled into fists. He was a single man holding back the apocalypse with nothing but his own stubbornness. "Admiral Vance," Elias said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "If you fire, you aren't bringing home a hero. You're bringing home a war that Earth cannot win. Is that the legacy you want? Or do you want to be the man who actually secured a peace that lasts 1,000 years?" There was a long, agonizing pause. Then the Admiral's face appeared on the main screen. He looked tired. He looked at Elias, really looked at him and saw the burn marks from the sun core and the blood on his flight suit. "Stand down," Vance commanded his fleet. The amber alerts on the tactical map faded to green. "But Thorne, if this bonding doesn't hold, your head is on the chopping block." Elias exhaled a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a lifetime. He turned back to the throne. Zilara was watching him, her containment fields dissipating entirely. She stepped down from the dais, her feet touching the cold obsidian floor, a gesture of humility no matriarch had performed in millennia. "You risked your own species for me," she whispered, her voice finally stripped of its imperial echo. "Why?" "I told you I was made of stone." "I told you," Elias replied, stepping closer until he could smell the ozone and jasmine again. "I'm a Terran. We don't care what things are made of. We only care about what they can become." Zilara reached out, her cool fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Then the treaty is fulfilled. But not as a debt. As a choice." She turned to the High Arbiter, who looked like he had aged a century in a single hour. "The Council may keep their traditions," Zilara announced, her voice ringing with a new kind of authority, one born of respect, not just power. "But from this day forward, the Hegemony and the Alliance shall not be master and vassal. We shall be partners. And if any noble or admiral disagrees, they can take it up with my consort." A cheer didn't erupt. The Valerian weren't built for cheering, but a soft, harmonious hum filled the room, a collective vibration of relief that shook the very foundations of the spire. Elias looked at the Empress, his Empress. The galaxy outside was still dangerous, the peace was fragile, and he was effectively in exile from his own military. But as Zilara leaned in, her forehead resting against his in a traditional Terran gesture she must have pulled from his mind, he knew he had won the only battle that mattered. "So," Elias whispered, "what's the first order of business for the new power couple of the sector?" Zilara's eyes sparked with a hint of that human mischief he'd shared with her. "I believe," she said, "you promised to show me a Terran sun. I think it's time we went for a flight." The story of the human who claimed a goddess didn't just change the map of the stars, it changed what it meant to be alive in a cold universe. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of the hegemony, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow space travelers. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more epic tales of human defiance and galactic romance, make sure to subscribe to HFY Sound Scape and ring that notification bell. We've got plenty more stories where the primitive humans show the galaxy what they're truly made of. Until next time, keep reaching for the stars.